Hello and welcome to Neutron One. I'm Jack.
And I'm Stuart, and this is the producer series deep dive on Van Halen's 1984.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
The one.
Yeah, we've been building up to this one for a while. As you probably know, we've got a couple of other packs already out, and this one was definitely more complicated, a lot more challenging, a lot more fun to make, and the results are pretty astounding. Can't wait to hear what you guys think of some of this stuff. So this video is going to be the deep dive, which means we go into real detail. You get to hear all the sounds. I'm going to play some of those in context as well to backing tracks so you can really hear them in their native environment. We're going to talk a little bit about how some of it was done. We're not going to reveal too many secrets though, because obviously there are things that Eddie didn't want people to know, and we're not going to be the ones to reveal those, but we'll certainly tell you enough to get an understanding of how complicated the process was. So the real start of this is just to give you a quick overview on what the producer series is. I don't need to go into much detail though, because we've got a couple of other videos that already have that information. So I'm just going to quickly flash this up on the screen for you and say a sentence that kind of explains it all in one, which is that the producer series profiles, rather than just being a profile of an amp and a speaker, as you would find in a traditional amp profile pack, they are profiles of the entire recording process, aiming to match exactly the sound that's on the record, not just the sound of the amp. But if you want to know more about that, there's extreme detail on the Metallica deep dive and the John Mayer one. We'll put a link to one of those in the description below. You can go and watch me talk through this diagram and explain in great detail exactly what we are capturing.
It's a good watch.
It is.
Catch it.
Yeah, it's interesting.
And if you want to know about the Metallica sound,
Oh, yeah, because again, that's another.
It's epic. Go check it out.
So there we go. I'm not going to talk about that now because it takes a while to go through, and we've already got it in other videos. You can get straight into the meat here. So 1984, it's now 2024, so 40th anniversary of the release of this album. Very formative for me when I started playing. Obviously, Van Halen was king of the kind of rock guitar scene and never really left that spot. I don't think. I'd struggle to think of anyone who would ever replace him. He was kind of a singular guy and a singular player, and the fact that still, even to this day, anything connected with Eddie is a big deal, I think is testament to that. But it's kind of pertinent for me for us to be in that sort of 40th anniversary year for this album. It's the reason why I chose to do this one. I know there'll be loads of fans who are like, "Oh, why didn't you do this album? It's my favorite," or and he does have different sounds throughout his career as well, each of which is kind of iconic in its own way. But that was really the reason for me. It's kind of a nice round number. It felt like a good thing to begin with. And for me personally as well, it's something that I remember being young and learning to play as being kind of the Eddie sound. And that would be different for everybody. Obviously, whatever was their time, I'm sure, would be the defining moment for them. So that's why we're doing this album first. It's certainly not by any means the last time we're going to come back to him, I'm sure. But I just want to go through this pack. We're going to go right into every sound that we've created and chosen, talk about why and what makes each of them unique. I'm going to play as well some of them to demonstrate, and talk a little bit as well about the studio effects, because of course the producer series contains also a preset for studio effects, and this is really the first of the packs that we've done that really contains a lot of effects and a lot of quite specific effects as well. I mean, it wouldn't be exaggerating to say that I had to spend time, for example, going and finding an authentic impulse response of a racquetball court.
Yeah.
because they built
the
studio that this album was recorded in was in Eddie's house, and it was built inside a racquetball court. And actually on some of the songs you can hear the slightly muffled ambience of that room in the sound. So there's been some extreme detail taken here, and not that we wouldn't do that on any of these packs. That is the entire point of them, but particularly with Eddie because of the focus and the mystery surrounding his sound and how he got his sound, exactly how he used his equipment. Um, the discussions have been going on since the first day he was heard, and I'm sure will be going on for 100 years more, or more than that even. It was a, I think at the beginning of his career, it was a protective measure that he took to keep the secret of how he was getting his sound
Yeah.
until the band had become famous enough that he could claim that as the Van Halen sound. Because I guess it would have been a disaster if someone else had found out what he was doing. I mean, no doubt everybody loved the sound he was getting, but if they found that out and another band released a single and it was a big hit and they claimed that sound, it would have been probably his worst nightmare. So it's not a surprise to me that he kept it all quite close to his chest at the beginning. But I think later he started to enjoy it a little bit. And I've seen many interviews where he kind of doesn't necessarily reveal the answer to the question being asked. Maybe he reveals an answer to a different question, or somewhere he's just flat out fibbing, I think. And I think he got his friends in on the act as well, and it was all just a bit of fun for him.
Lies.
I honestly believe that at the end,
I played the guitar.
In the end, he was doing it for his own personal amusement.
Yeah.
And why not? If you're in that position, why not enjoy it, right? But there are some things that I have discovered in the process of doing this that do explain an awful lot about why things sound the way they do. I'm not going to bust it. I'm sorry. I can't be that guy. What I know, you don't necessarily need to know to enjoy these sounds. You'll be able to hear how closely they match what's on the record.
It's like Coca-Cola.
It's more personal for me. I don't like the idea of revealing secrets that he could have revealed.
And you don't
himself.
need to, because you can get it in a pack. So just enjoy it.
Eddie took them to the grave, and as far as I'm concerned, I'm not the one to bust that. It was his wish. So, but you'll hear the sounds, and you'll have access to those, and they are the same. And hopefully, they will bring as much joy to every other player as they have to me. I wouldn't be lying to say that I kind of understand now why he had such a grin on his face all the time.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a fantastically fun sound to play through, and it's really transparent to you as a player. Your fingers, you can hear what you're doing, you can hear the expression, the dynamism in it, the ability for you to create different sounds just using the volume control. It's incredible. It's really been great fun to play, let alone to make. So we're gonna jump right in now to the actual sounds and talk first just a little bit about
jump.
Yeah, that is quite fun. It wasn't intentional either. Talk a little bit about why we've chosen these songs from the album. As you probably know, if you've seen any of the other deep dives, we try to choose 5 sounds that represent the most variety from the album. The reason for that, again, as I've explained, but it's worth mentioning again, these take a very long time to make. They're extremely complicated. Lots of research, lots of experimentation to get to the point where it's absolutely on the nose. So it's not practical for us to do every single track on an album. And I don't always believe that that's valuable either, because there isn't that much variety on most albums where guitar playing is prevalent. There tends to be certain things that a player will reuse. And that's kind of true here. But there are different guitars being used on this album. And when he does change guitar, he also does slightly change the sound as well. So that's something that become very evident when we start looking at things like Panama and particularly Hot for Teacher, when we see how the sounds react when you start to manipulate the controls on the guitar. And that should be quite revealing for you as well. In terms of something we've talked about before, which is behavior. I use that word, and it's maybe not a commonly used word when you talk about guitar sounds, but it's really, really important for us to try to explain to you that is really what's different about what you get when the entire recording chain is recreated. As we've said before, you can quite easily take a similar sound. I mean, this is a Marshall Plexi at the heart of it. All right, an old one, but still, if you had a similar profile of a similar amplifier, no doubt you could probably just take some kind of AI or matching EQ and, like, I don't know, analyze maybe an isolated track and then apply that to your sound and possibly fool your ears. But there's just so much going on with this stuff. When you start to manipulate the guitar and do all the things that Eddie does and play the way that he does, you're going to find that there's so much missing information, which is why we don't do any of the sounds that way. They're all deep recreations by pieces of equipment and settings, and well, in this case as well, you have a thing like a variac at play, which can massively change the sound even of the amp, and obviously the speaker too, which we're going to go into as well and talk about how huge a part of this sound the behavior of the speaker is, that non-linear behavior of a real speaker, and how that's ended up being maybe my favorite part of these sounds. But let's go into the first one now, and I'll talk about it a little bit before we start actually playing. I'm not going to play through the whole song for this one. It's there's not a lot going on in most of it. So this is Jump. It has a keyboard intro. I think at the time that was something that was quite a shock for a lot of rock fans. But it was Eddie's vision, and he was definitely right. It was a huge hit.
I mean, that is like
a massive
keyboards. That's the most iconic keyboard part probably ever.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. So and I think that there was the kind of not quite a consensus in the band about whether it was the right thing to do, but he was definitely proven right. But he did also put a solo on it, and it's quite an interesting one. It's a bit of a patchwork to listen to, but I get the feeling that maybe it was quite improvised, like a lot of his stuff. But it showcases the sound really well, and the sound on Jump is probably like the most produced sound on this album. It's got the most effects on it. It's got the kind of most smooth sound going on. He does tend to keep his sound quite raw most of the time. So this one, because of the keyboards and I think the whole feel of it, it was all about doing pop. They wanted to do a pop song that obviously with it being Van Halen, that couldn't not include guitar playing, but all of it was kind of, I think, pointing in that direction. So it's kind of interesting, and it made the sound unique on the album, and maybe, possibly unique for the whole of their career. It was not something that I heard him ever do again. But so here we go. I'm gonna play the sound. I want you to hear these sounds in isolation as well. Obviously, I'm going to play them to the track, but the tracks and the level of the guitar when I play along, I've tried to match that because I want it to be as easy as possible for you to hear how that sound is correct for the song. But equally, I'm sure there's a lot of people who would want to hear it on its own, and this is a deep dive, so why the hell not, right? So here we go.
You can see the speakers on max, like taking off in a studio room.
So the speakers in this is a sound that you could use almost as the poster child. For everything being on full. And that is the way he had his amps. They were everything was on full, right? And in some cases, the sound of the speaker actually can be almost more overbearing in the overall tone than the sound of the amp, because they are 25 watt speakers. The Celestion Greenbacks, right? And JBL as well. But the kind of overarching sound is the Greenback, and it has this kind of built-in ability to sound like it's going to die soon.
Yeah, that sounds great when it's doing it.
As soon as the amp gets going, and that is its sound. That's the recognizable sound of a Greenback. Its sound comes out when it gets too loud that it can't handle it anymore. So even with 4 of those in a cabinet in a 4x12, you're going to get to 100 watts of rated power, but a Marshall on full is it's at least 400 watts RMS, probably more. So you can imagine that the magnets were having a hard time, and so so there is distortion coming from the speakers. There is compression coming from the speakers as well, because they are way beyond the point where they can take the energy being fed to them and make it louder. they just kind of squash it and go, ugh.
Yeah,
And
no more room.
and that's really important to the sound, and it's contributing to an awful lot of the way that it behaves, and even more so in some of the other tracks, which I'll speak about, specifically the way it reacts to the guitar when we do Half a Teacher, because it's a great example, because you actually hear him do it in the song. So it's maybe more the right place to talk about that thing. So I'm going to let me play a bit of Jump. There's not a lot of guitar at the beginning, so we're going to skip right to the sort of last bridge
the
where
good stuff.
Guitar comes in, and then the solo, and then maybe we do some of the big chords and stuff too, just so you can hear like all of the inner workings of the song and the guitar as it sits in that. So here we go.
You say you don't know, you won't know until you begin. So can't you see me standing here? I got my back against the wrecking machine. I ain't the worst that you've seen. Can't you see what I mean? Ow, might as well jump, jump. Go ahead, jump. Might as well jump, jump. Go ahead, jump. Jump.
There we go.
Go ahead and jump.
Go ahead and jump. Exactly. So cool sound, cool vibe to that song. I love the solo. It's one of those things you can just feel the energy in it. It's like maximum effort, you know, like the old Deadpool thing, I guess. But it's one of the songs that he saves all of it up for that little burst. Like, there's very little going on. It's all quite laid back. The bit in the verse is really just. That's kind of what he's playing for the first minute. Then he has that. That thing, and other than that, he's kind of saving all of the energy release for the solo, and it's cool. It's great. I think that it's one of my favorite songs of theirs, even though it has the least guitar playing, which is bizarre, but it's masterful. Anyway, that's the sound, and that's how it sounds in the track. You've heard it on its own as well. Hopefully you can see that it's actually maybe not as specific to Van Halen as you might. I mean, like, I can imagine this for anything kind of from the 80s. Just drop your volume down a bit and you're like, you know, I don't know. What is that? Bryan Adams, isn't it? Or, you know, kick the corn tap on. I'm sure he used a Vox AC30 on that track.
Yeah.
I don't know why I'm playing Bryan Adams, but the point being, it's very.
Brian stole
the Plexi is an extremely versatile amp, and actually, the kind of core tone of what was going on for a lot of players in the 80s came from Eddie.
Yeah.
So of course it started to become prevalent everywhere, and then when you listen to it out of context, even the sound, I think his version of it is much nicer than most other people's, because obviously he had that secret sauce of the way that he specifically used and set things up that gave it just, I think, a little bit more character, because there was just more speaker, more power amp saturation, less of distortion, it wasn't all about just, you know, preamp gain, which I think is what a lot of people made a mistake with when they then later tried
Music
to
and the
take that
natural
sound.
distortion in the speaker and stuff.
But when you do it all with the preamp distortion, you mask the sound of the guitar.
Yeah.
And his guitar was always clear, and that you could hear his fingers, you can hear the expression. That kind of twangy. You hear the fingers in the playing through it, even though it sounds really overdriven. It's actually layer upon layer upon layer of overdrive being created by different things that has complexity in it, and also it doesn't mask the sound of the guitar as much as if it was all coming from a single source of more overdrive, right? And I think that actually is what's magical about the way that these sounds work, the musical nature of hearing more of the instrument and more of the player. So let's jump. Let's move on. Right, now there's a reason why we have another guitar, and in fact we'll have another guitar for every song, and that is because Eddie didn't really use a tuner much, I don't think. At least it doesn't seem that way. If you listen to the album, it seems like, and obviously I'm only speculating, but it seems very much like he's tuned his guitar to itself, which I'm saying because if you listen to the songs, the guitar is the chords are very in tune with themselves, which is actually not the way a guitar works. It's not an equally tempered instrument. So at some place or other, it's always out of tune with itself. Even when you tune it perfectly on a tuner, you play a chord down here and one up here, and they're not. And even if your intonation is perfect, it's just the way they are. So I think that he favoured tuning his guitar to itself, maybe using harmonics, and then once he had it good, he would have the rest of the band tuned to him, and then cut the song. That's my guess. As a producer, I'm thinking that that's the only reason that I can really fathom why it would be a different tuning on every song. So that's why we're changing guitars every time. So Half a Teacher is a perfect example of behavior, and hopefully now we can really crystallize this word when I show you exactly what I mean rather than trying to describe it. It's not so easy when you don't have an example, but this is great because Eddie plays through the song on the same guitar. He's slightly cheating. It's going to be a lot harder for me. He was using a Gibson Flying V, and he had separate volume controls for the two pickups, which means that he could set up a clean sound on his neck pickup. And then flick to the other pickup, and immediately the volume would be up because it has a separate volume control. Without having to like I'm going to have to do. So you're going to have to excuse
ambience. That sounds incredible.
Yeah, that's the basketball. The racquetball court.
Yeah, go back and listen to that bit.
Yeah. I even matched the size.
Yeah.
Using the blueprint I found. So it's the right size racquetball court, not just any. And slightly dampened for all the equipment that was in there as well, if you're interested. So I had to do that to get it to sound the same. Anyway, so this is a song of really 3 parts. Ignore the solo. We don't need to talk about the solo on this song. It's an improvised thing anyway, and it isn't the real interest piece, I don't think, for this one. The intro, the tapping intro, and the clean sound that he then follows that with. In terms of playing, I mean, if you're interested more in the playing side of it, the fact that he's doing the whole thing as a swing is insane. And if any of you have ever tried to learn this song, you will know the pain that is trying to swing at that tempo. He must have been born to do it. I have no idea how he even conceived. I mean, I guess it was probably partly Alex's fault if he came up with the kick drum pattern. And ultimately, the whole thing is based, as it begins, from the sound of his Ferrari engine, which I guess had a swing. I don't know. I have no idea, but it's hellishly difficult.
Whatever he was taking.
It's really hard. So again, excuse me if I don't nail it. It's a lifetime pursuit probably to absolutely nail down playing a swing beat at whatever tempo this crazy song is at. But I'll do my best just to demo the sound. So I'm going to play the first part and we'll stop when the sound changes. because that's where we really want to talk about the behavior, and it will hopefully really nicely illustrate my point. So here we go. So this is where we stop.
The magic.
And I don't have a second volume control, so in his case, he can just wallop, go straight onto the neck pickup, and have his volume preset perfectly for the next part that he wants to play. So. So I think we've got the reverb a little bit high. I'm going to turn it down a bit. Just a tad, so that we can hear the sound a bit more. The actual sound of the reverb does go up and down in volume through the mix of this song. There's more of it on the heavy sound than there is.
Yeah.
It sort of dumbs down a bit for the clean part. Right, so that sound is just the neck pickup with the volume turned right down. And here's I guess the part where we talk about the behavior. If you listen to the sound.
Wow.
Right, so if I turn the volume back up again, and then back down again, here's what's evident. It doesn't get any quieter.
Exactly the same volume.
Right, so people always talk when they're referring to the realism of an amp model or a piece of guitar equipment, this idea that you can turn down the volume on the guitar and the sound will clean up. Now, I mean, even a Boss pedal does that. I really don't understand why it's any gauge of realism. But what is a gauge of realism in terms of the behavior, the non-linear behavior of the power amp and the speaker of a loud, and the microphone as well, actually, which is also non-linear, of a loud recording of a guitar amp, is the fact that the speaker's inability to get louder acts as a natural compressor. And the power amp's inability to get more power, mainly because of the fact, in this case, they're using a variac, which is quite low in voltage going into the amp, means that it can only get to a certain volume before it can't get any louder.
Yeah.
And actually, the way that this is balanced, and clearly the way that he has adjusted it, is so that that point is perfectly where he gets a nice clean sound. I mean, you can go almost totally. Almost totally clean, and it doesn't get any quieter. So why is that useful? Well, imagine you're playing live,
Yeah.
and you have one sound,
Yeah.
and some of your sounds need to be clean.
Yeah.
If you didn't have that behavior, then you turn the volume down, you get a lovely clean sound that nobody can hear.
Yeah.
Over the drums.
Yeah.
Because it's gonna get, and that is what normally does happen with most amp models, unfortunately, because they don't contain non-linear speaker behavior. They may contain non-linear preamp behavior, like the distortion in the amp itself, but the things that come after it, actually, when you start talking about it being really loud, those are all missing.
Yeah.
So I personally wasn't aware quite of how much of a difference it made until I started making these sounds and playing them, and realized that when I went to use a different sound after finishing the pack, that I was really missing something.
Still quite a way away.
Well, no, I missed it. I was like, what the hell? Why? I need to go back to that and find what is the thing about this that I'm craving, that I just want to play it all the time. That behavior is, to me as a player, is something that I'm feeling I don't want to let go of. I don't want it to not be there. I want to put that on every sound, you know. And actually that led to an understanding of just how important the speaker was, and why that is not part of other sounds that we're used to playing through. And it's mainly due to the fact that we're using impulse responses that can't capture those dynamics. It's not capable of it. An impulse response, as you probably know by now, is really just an equalizer with a bit of ambience as well. But it's a complicated EQ curve. And so, I mean, a speaker really is only an equalizer when it's extremely quiet. And all of these sounds that we are getting into, they're all loud.
Yeah, when you get right to the top, it's nothing there because it can't.
But so it's the same EQ. I mean, like it's the same frequencies, but it doesn't have the behavior. As in, when you turn it down, it's going to clean the preamp up, and the power, and maybe the sound will get clean, but it won't stay the same volume. Right. So this is. Listen to the volume level. And there's no effects on this. This is the raw thing through its effect preset. That says no effects. There's no dynamic effects on this sound. It is coming straight from Neural Amp Modeler as you're hearing it and into the reverb. Listen to the volume of that sound relative to the. It's almost exactly the same. It almost feels even slightly louder.
If you hold on to a bit of the sound, you can follow it through, and it's like identical.
Yeah, and like when you really start to mess about with the guitar as well, and just coil tap this and take the volume right down, you can start to get these kind of really interesting, again, very 80s. But there's a clean sound living inside of this, which is usable all the time without any. There's no kind of downside to it in the way that you would traditionally find, where you could get the sound maybe, but then it would be quiet, and so you can't use that in a live scenario as a tool to replace the need for another channel. This you absolutely can, and that's what he did.
The feedback from the guys that are using it live, who've gone straight to live with it, that's exactly what they do. They're just like, it's amazing. I can sit there and I can play this beautiful thing, and I can rip into a solo, and it's bosh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a revelation. And so anyway, the long and short of that is, clearly, I wanted to dig into that, and it's turning into a new product, which will be a non-linear, completely natural behaving speaker simulation that you'll be able to then apply to other sounds to get some of that back, get some of this to happen. Obviously, it requires the source sound to also be properly modeled in a non-linear way, but that is the case, I think, for the majority of amp models that are out there. So the speaker could well be the missing link, and we're hoping that will allow for people to kind of put a bit of that loudspeaker sound onto their own current thing that they like, and start to understand how important it is and how big of a change it makes to the sound and the feel specifically. Okay, so here we are again. Another guitar, another song. This is Panama. So this guitar is suited for Panama for a couple of reasons. Firstly, it is a very nice Squier Contemporary Series Strat. So the guitar that he used for a lot of stuff back at that time was his Frankenstein thing, Frankenstrat, which was kind of a Charvel piece guitar, bits and pieces from the Charvel company as they were then, who sold something called Boogie Bodies, which I think was like, literally bits and pieces. They would sell necks and bodies and parts, and people would buy them and put them together. So that, and I think even the ones that he had were rejects. And I'm pretty sure they were unpainted as well to start with, before he started putting stripes and spray paint on them and stuff, and like reflectors, like from the truck stop. Reflectors on the back to reflect the lights onto the audience. But at the base, it's a Strat with a pickup in it that he's taken out of an old Gibson ES335. So this is a Strat, and the pickups in it are Gibson pickups from not an old ES335. I'm not going to go back to the 50s and rip one apart to do this demo, sorry. But they are from a new-ish Les Paul. They are the new Burst Buckers. They sound great. They sound very Gibson. And basically, I think if you had to summarize the sound of Eddie's guitar, especially in that mid-period of the 80s, then it would be a Fender guitar with Gibson pickups in it. I think it would be probably the the best way to describe the DNA of the instrument he was playing. Obviously with a Floyd Rose as well. The only difference in his case is that he had disconnected the neck pickup completely, so there was no neck pickup effectively in the Frankenstrat, and so he played just with the bridge pickup always engaged and a volume control, and that was it. And still perfectly useful when you've got a sound, as we were discussing in the last songs section, that's capable of transforming into, you know, another channel effectively. Like if you had an amp with a clean channel and an overdrive channel, I mean, he just turns his volume down and it's got all of the utility of that. So it kind of explains how he was able to spend like almost 2 decades of his career playing through one sound.
Yeah.
It's kind of awe-inspiring, actually. You think about all he achieved with that, and it was all just his playing and, you know, one volume control and one pickup. Crazy. So Panama is a different sound, and it's the Frankenstrat sound, because it had a kind of an interesting thing going on with the pickup. It was very slightly not as loud on one coil as it was on the other, and that gave it a little bit of a bright sound, a very bright sound actually. And so I think that in the cases where he was using that guitar for recording, it seems to me like he's really adjusted the amp. As you probably know, on a Plexi, you have the bright channel and the normal channel. And it's pretty well known that he had his jumper so that he could blend the two and have a bit of each. And for the rounder sounding guitars, you can definitely hear there's a little bit of the treble channel added in to make them sound a bit more like the Frankenstrat does. But when you use the Gibson pickup into the Marshall, particularly the older Gibson pickups actually were very, very bright anyway, but that one even more so because of its slight, maybe through tinkering, was slightly changed, damage. Maybe it was intentional, maybe it wasn't, but it was clearly quite a twanger. So he would have backed down completely on the treble channel when using that guitar for recording, and you can hear it's a warmer sound when he turns the volume down. So Panama's a great example for it. In order to demonstrate it fully, I think I'm going to have to play this song all the way through. There's a long section in the solo where there is again behavior that your ears should immediately recognize as authentic when he turns the volume down and starts playing the slower part of the solo. If I'd used one of the other sounds, it wouldn't work because it would, when you turn it down, it would become very bright. When you have even a small amount of the treble channel in a Plexi turned in, and then you feed it less volume, it's incredibly bright. It's really twangy, almost like it will turn anything into a Telecaster immediately, you know. Whereas when he turns the volume down in the solo on this track, he has this really lovely, warm, throaty sound, even though the pickup is insanely bright. So that's kind of, that leads you to understand what he's probably done with the amplifier. And maybe, you know, some pre-EQ involved as well. Again, I'm not going to get too into the secrets, but I'm pretty sure he had an EQ pedal on for some of the songs and off for others. And that's evident also in the fact that there are more gain on some of the sounds than there are on others. But without further ado, I think I'm going to just play through this song.
It's time.
And pay particular attention to what happens in the solo when he goes from the sort of snarling dog fast part at the beginning, and it all calms down and you start hearing the revving of the Lamborghini, which was his Lamborghini, by the way, in the studio. How cool is that? There's a flex for you. That's the engine you can hear is Eddie's Lamborghini. So when he starts doing that and it slows down, you just listen to the way the sound changes. And again, this hopefully helped to illustrate that we're not talking just about something that sounds right to your ears. Like that sounds like the same thing to me. The authenticity is in this behavior, and it's why I keep using the word, even though I know it's a new term when it comes to describing guitar sounds that are profiled. I really want you guys to try and grasp it, because it's going to help us to really, you know, get the penny to drop why what we're doing here is so different to the sort of traditional amp profiling that's going on already. So let's play it.
see the road from the heat coming off. I reach down between my legs, ease the seat back.
She's fighting, I'm buying, right behind it, real me now. Got the feeling, power steering, busy popping, ain't no stopping now.
That was brilliant.
Right, there we go. A few mistakes in there. Eddie, forgive me.
We
I
love
tried my best.
character.
So yeah, really interesting to me what happens to the sound when you turn the volume down. In this case, it's kind of the opposite of what you'd expect on a Marshall. Normally, you turn the volume down on the guitar and it gets bright and twangy. When you do it on this sound, it becomes this kind of lovely warm thing that's just got an real organic feel to it.
Smooth.
And the expression as well. It just it's great. And it's one of the reasons why that's such a cool solo, I think, is just that contrast of like going straight with that kind of hard bluesy style, double stop bending and all that kind of thing going on. And then it just comes down with the vibe of the drums coming down as well, and it has that really lovely warm mellow sound. So yeah, cool. Had to really play that one through, I think, for that to make sense. So hopefully you could see what I was trying to explain with that. Hopefully the playing was good enough for you to get a feel for the sound. And that really is it for Panama. I think we'll move on now. So another guitar, another song. Right then, another guitar.
My
Another
favourite.
guitar. So off of the 80s, old school Marshall, Charvel.
Perfect replica. Perfect replica.
Perfect
as you
replica.
can
Yeah,
see.
it's absolutely not just some
Absolutely
electrical
not.
tape that I've just stuck on here.
£58 million on.
But then it makes it better because if it's a real replica, you have to do it yourself.
Yeah.
Because he did it all himself.
Yeah.
So that's my argument. No, I'm sticking to it for this. An old Charvel. And a couple of modern additions here just to keep my sanity. One of those is locking tuners. The other is locking saddles, the new Wilkinson ones that Pete Thorne got everybody talking about. They lock the strings, keep it in tune, basically with these two, pretty much as good as a Floyd Rose. Perhaps if you go really wild, it might go out of tune, but it's not bad. And perfect for this example. The pickup in here is a Seymour Duncan JB, an old one. They do sound a little different to the new ones, but if you go and read up on that, you'll find out how. But the reason for assembling something really as similar as I could get to the Frankenstrat here is there's something funny going on with this sound. So this sound is Beat It. Now, I know this is not on the album, but it was done at the same time. And it's interesting for several reasons. One of the most interesting things about Beat It compared to a lot of other Van Halen recordings is the fact that there were other people there, which means there actually is some good information about what was going on. Yeah. And those maybe aren't as revelatory as you would hope because the sound is also unique. Things were done differently on this session, and they resulted in a very different sound to certainly the 1984 album or any other Van Halen recording. Even though it was Eddie and his guy, his engineer, who did all of the other recordings that got the sound, there were some interesting little things about this session that after a bit of digging led me down a slightly different path to understanding why it sounds different. And that to me made it highly desirable to put on this pack simply because, well, I mean, I'm not going to rule out doing a Michael Jackson pack. There are a lot of great guitar players who play with Michael.
I would love that.
No, I bet you would. You're a big fan. I know that. But for the moment, at least, it was kind of a missed opportunity, a little Easter egg, if you will, and a bit of fun to hear a slightly different take on his sound, and maybe also to understand some of the reasons why it's different, which I thought were fascinating. But I mean, maybe that's just me. So, what do we know about the Beat It session that is different to the rest of what he was doing at that time? There are two key things. It was mixed by somebody different. It's a Michael Jackson song, so it would have been mixed by Bruce Swidien, the master. god to us audio engineers, the guy who literally wrote the book on mic technique. And so, his tastes are going to be different to the way that it would have been mixed if it was a Van Halen record. It's not as pure rock. I think Michael wanted a rock song, but he wanted a rock pop song, and certainly went through the filter of his production engine, Bruce mixing it and recording all of the stuff other than the solo. And, of course, Quincy Jones and his sensibilities about blending sounds and trying to make something really unique for Michael every time, which definitely they achieved here. So the main kind of interest piece for me was the fact there was another guitar player on the session, and it's a guitar player who I love, not just for his playing, but also because he's very knowledgeable and he shares that knowledge in interviews, which you can imagine for me is extremely useful. So whether you realize it or not, Steve Lukather from Toto was actually the guy who played everything other than the solo on Beat It, all the other guitar parts, with a bit of Paul Jackson Jr., I think, as well. But the kind of the rockier stuff that wasn't the full Eddie was played by Steve Lukather, and he was there in the studio, and there are even photos of the two of them together, so I know they were there at the same time. And Steve has talked in interviews subsequently about that session and revealed some things maybe that he didn't realize were quite as significant as they would have been to me getting that sound. Why would he think that? He wouldn't know. But the most important one is the amp used on the day was hired. It wasn't Eddie's amp. They had an amp delivered, he hired one in. And to me, that was immediately an interest point, because I thought, well, here we're going to now hear what's different about his amp to a standard one that he's hired. Although, of course, he did still use the Variac. So there were a lot of differences, and this sound has been mixed differently too. And it's also had a whacking, great big brick wall, 5 kilohertz low pass filter put on it, cutting all the high frequencies above that and making it a really nice, smooth sound, which obviously fitted much better with Michael's music than more of a brash tone that you would get if you left all that high frequency action going wild, particularly in this case. Because why is it significant that the amp is hired? Eddie uses a Variac, and that's well known and documented. But he also compensates slightly for the effect of the Variac, I think, on his own amps by having them biased slightly hotter, if not quite a lot hotter, than they would normally be if they were fed the full voltage. And this offsets a little bit of the fizzy fuzzy stuff that goes on when you starve the circuit of power. And it gives a slightly more full sound when you just balance it a little bit with a higher bias. Now, I was speculating, but I can pretty much say for certain, listening to the raw tracks and having gone through the process of trying to get the behavior the same, as that word again, it's extremely important, and we'll demonstrate it as well, that there definitely was no rebiasing going on the hired amplifier, and he was still using a Variac. And that caused some very unique behavior that we are able to experience now because we've got it kind of available to actually play. So let me show you a little bit of what that is. And it's basically the guitar becomes sort of very microphonic. And I don't mean that in like it's squealing and feeding back traditionally like you think a pickup. I mean the guitar becomes microphonic because when you starve the circuit of voltage, you create immense compression in the power stage. Similarly to how we were talking about a speaker where you're feeding it energy, but it isn't able to turn that energy into movement, so it doesn't get any louder. When you starve the power amp of energy, and then you ask it to amplify, it can't do that, and so it doesn't get any louder, so you get compression. But it actually, because it's a valve circuit, tube circuit, for everyone who's not in the UK, it doesn't do that evenly. It's not linear. It's not going to do exactly the same amount of compression like a studio compressor would across the entire frequency range. It does it in a hyper-focused way on the low frequencies because they require the highest amount of power to amplify. You think about the movement of a speaker when it's reproducing high frequencies. Usually you'd have a 1-inch tweeter in your hi-fi speaker doing all of your high frequencies, and you can't even see that move. And then you contrast that with the bass speaker, the woofer, when you've got your speaker up loud, you can see it moving. You can feel the air moving. Huge amounts of more energy required in order to translate that want, produce low frequency into actual movement. So the combination of putting a low pass filter, which is cutting the high frequency energy in the resulting signal massively, it's almost a brick wall, and it's a very sharp shelf where it's attenuating all the high frequency sound, combined with the low frequency sound being hyper compressed by that situation, you end up with a guitar that sounds like a bass drum. Interesting, right? And what do you hear on the beginning of Eddie's solo? Yeah. You hear what sounds like somebody knocking on a door. It's not. It's definitely him knocking on the guitar. And it's a result of this behavior. And that might seem like a stretch, but if you actually listen to the isolated guitar track, which you can find on YouTube, you will also hear when he starts tapping the fretboard, doing this, you can hear that knocking sound in his playing. Even in his picking, you can hear this low thud of a knocking sound that is a result of the situation that we've described electronically. So for me, when I heard that sound, that was obviously the beginning of me trying to work out what the hell was going on. I could hear it was different, but through that journey and just from that one thing that Steve Lukather revealed, that the amp was hired, that's how we ended up actually working it out and getting it there. And so this sound,
Found the gold.
this sound behaves the same way,
Yeah.
right? So if that's something that you're interested in, then hopefully you got something from that little story. But we're going to play the solo now. We're going to try to anyway.
I've seen a lot of you guys online doing the knock, like just get it for the knock. Get it for the knock. It's
that's
fantastic.
I mean, yeah. If you ever need the sound of a knocking door in one of your tracks, this is the sound to use for sure.
Yeah, it definitely wasn't.
It fooled everyone else for all this time.
I thought it was for years.
Yeah.
I was just like,
well, I mean, I've heard a few different stories. It was the sound of somebody knocking on the vocal booth door while Michael was recording.
Yeah.
Or it was somebody knocking on a microphone was another one I saw. There were a few, but I mean, to me at least,
when you hear it in the context,
you're in
of
the
the song.
I mean, it sounds exactly like it. It probably is. There we go. Well, it probably is. So we're not revealing anything. I feel better about that. Here we go. Let's have a go at this. This is not an easy one.
Next time I'm getting some MJ Club. So I look forward to all of the samples of people knocking the vocal room door. But
Yeah.
that to me,
I mean, I don't know. Can we officially release that as a mystery solved? The knocking sound.
well, MythBusters will be onto it, but I think we can.
I think if they hit it, if they took that on,
if the MythBusters did
it would be upheld.
Yeah.
I think that would.
I'm
be...
going to reach out to him. I was watching the show last night. I love that.
I don't think that that's something that we should feel bad about.
No.
Confirming.
No.
Pretty sure.
No.
I mean, if you'd like it on its own for you to analyze.
Yeah.
Maybe without the reverb on as well, because of course it's not on at that point, is it? We could just have to mute that. I don't know. To me, it's all there.
Busted.
That's the magic. But it is the magic, right? That's the behavior.
Yeah.
So again, when you start playing the sound, all of that stuff is on the track. You can hear it. What fun.
Yeah. How many people can be there knocking?
I don't know. Anyway,
Hello?
so that for me was a real interest piece, and I'm really pleased that we put it on here. I know it wasn't on the album, but sometimes it's good to just embrace what feels like the right thing to do, and for me that did. So there it is. We got one more track left to go through, and it's not a long process because we're only really looking at the beginning of it, and it's more sort of behavioral stuff. It's Drop Dead Legs. So I'm gonna.
And you would have already stopped and got the pack, and you're going to be knocking on your guitars right now.
Exactly, yeah.
So welcome back.
That's it.
everyone.
Yeah, we look forward to the knocking video.
Knocking, yeah.
Pandemic. It's about to occur. Yeah. Right. So Drop Dead Legs. Another tuning. So another guitar. This guitar, I don't know if you're aware of these. They're pretty odd, pretty rare. Steve Stevens, the guy who plays for Billy Idol, had a long-standing relationship with Hamer, but very famously had his favourite guitar, which was a Charvel as well. His career and Eddie's intermingled at all kinds of points. There are loads of stories about those two guys. They were friends for sure. Eddie even gave Steve a bunch of guitars and amps and stuff when he started doing his tour with Vince Neil, I think it was. And he just couldn't get the sound he wanted. And Ed was like, just went in the back of the truck and handed him a bunch of, Music Man, would have been Music Man, Eddie Van Halen models, which are all worth 10 grand each at least now, I would have thought.
Yeah.
But, what a guy. That it did happen. I know it did. I've seen the guitars. I've seen Steve playing them. So I sort of heard the story, but I think I heard it from Steve Stevens as well at some point. So I knew that it was the truth, which just makes me happy. I don't know why, to think that he was like that. Well, what
Just
a
a
great
good
guy.
guy.
But anyway, so Steve's taste in guitars clearly very similar to Eddie's. This is really a kind of very slightly evolved version of Eddie's Strat, right? It's got directly mounted pickups at a funny angle. I mean, he's got two, so luxury. But yeah, same kind of thing. It's nitro paint, so very thin paint, so it doesn't really stop the body from resonating too much. If you believe in that kind of thing, we're not getting into that now. And a very similar kind of neck to what would have been on an old Charvel, which would have been a modified or hot rodded Fender style guitar, rather than what they turned into in modern times, which is that very specific thin neck type thing. And I think the original as well, mine certainly is, had a much more Fender-like feel to them. Anyway, getting down a rabbit hole there. So Drop Dead Legs is a cool track for this process for two reasons. It's a cool sound. It doesn't have loads of effects on, so that makes it different to the others that we've done already. But another reason that it's really cool is that the intro to the song is just the guitar on its own, which, as you can imagine, makes it very easy for you to start listening in detail to exactly what the sound is doing. And what the sound is doing is more behavior. Again, this kind of thing that we were talking about earlier on, with one slight difference in that intentionally the sound is quieter when he's got the volume turned down, because when the track comes in, they want it to go whoomp. So the guitar on the fader of the mixing console during the mix, they've turned it up. But the sound, if we just turn it on, then you might even hear it. Yep. So the sound at the beginning is just the volume turned not all the way down. I don't know what are we on here. Let's see, 3 or 4, something like that. But then, after he goes down and plays that chord, the whole thing goes. Now, I think I'm probably playing this wrong. There are a few different ways I've seen people play it, and there's one guy I saw play it that sounded exactly right, but it isn't me. So the point being, you've got these two separate sounds again, clean-ish. So this is in between, I guess, what you heard on Hot for Teacher and this. It's right in that crunchy. You can still hear the power amp So listen to that, right? When I'm playing that more full chordal type stuff, you can hear the layers that I'm talking about. The saturation of the preamp is actually quite minimal. There's not a lot of overdrive coming from the preamp part of the amp. Loads coming from the power amps. Did I just say that? And even more coming from the speaker. Right? So listen to it and hear the layers. How do we know that there's not loads of gain coming from the preamp? Listen to that sort of bell-like, clean overtone. You can hear through the sound. You can hear the guitar through the sound, even though it's really overdriven. That's what shows you that there's a complex array of separate non-linear processes in effect.
Yeah.
If it was just preamp gain, it would, by the time you got to that amount of gain, it would have fully masked the sound of the guitar, more or less.
Yeah.
You would not be hearing that twangy stuff, and you can still. And hear that
You just hear
energy,
how
that just-
loud that was.
it just sounds. It
That's
sounds
like-
loud, exactly,
yeah.
because it is, right, and it's a recording being reproduced rather than an amp being reproduced.
Yeah.
An amp sounds exactly like whatever you're recording it through, but when you turn it up in a real space, the amount of the sound pressure in that environment that makes its way back into the microphone
Yeah.
is unavoidable if
Yeah,
it's loud enough.
Yeah.
You can't get it out of the sound. It is the sound, right? And of course, the speakers, when they hit the point where they can no longer deliver what's being asked of them, start to change more than just the EQ of the sound. They start to compress and distort and
Your little
like,
artifacts.
and die inside. Listen to it
yeah.
going, oh my God, it's like...
It's like, if you can imagine yourself shouting.
Listen. And here is why the behavior matters. When you turn the volume of the guitar down, the speaker is no longer dying inside, so you don't preserve its equalization. It now has a new thing to say about that quieter sound.
Yeah.
And it's much more pleased about the fact that
It's
you're
like,
not-
hello, I'm much.
It's well, I mean, he did use a plexi,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
it's not entirely out of. So when a guy plugs a Telecaster into a plexi and starts playing on the normal channel, and wow, doesn't that sound similar? Funnily enough, behavior. Everything that you interact with that sound with causes it to react in the same way that the real amp would in that situation, i.e. loud.
Yeah.
And since the sound that we're trying to get is the sound of the amp loud, and of course all the production that went on top of it, which we've not talked about in this video, but we did ask you to go and watch it, so if you didn't, then you've missed something cool. But trust me, there's a lot going on. This is not an amp profile. This is a sound profile containing an amp and a whole lot of other things, all of which massively influence what you then hear on the record itself and are important to recreating the full behavior. So I think that's full circle on that word, and I'm using it a lot for a reason, and I do explain that reason earlier, so I won't go into it again. But here is another great example of that, and it's what it's really translating into. As much as you can use it as a buzzword to say, oh, this is doing something different to other products, that's not what's important. What's important is actually the way that Eddie used the sound in the beginning as an expressive tool to translate his music from what he wanted it to sound like to what you heard. and there not be any barrier in the way of him doing that. If he doesn't have a sound that's capable of translating what he's playing into what he wants to hear, then there's going to be constant frustration. And if there's one thing we knew about Eddie, it was that if there was something that frustrated him, it was time to get out the hammer and chisel and bend it to his will, right?
Yeah.
So he wouldn't have settled for that. So we know that whatever experimentation took place to get things into this state where they were able to translate his emotional content into music that was pleasing to hear as well, he definitely did something right. And hopefully the sounds that we've put in the pack here that also behave that way are going to give some people a little insight into the way an amplifier can behave when it's recorded properly, when it's recorded loud, when the speakers are loud, when the amps are loud.
Yeah.
That's not something that was recorded at every opportunity throughout the whole of the heyday of music recording, arguably, certainly guitar recording. That's not something that was done for no good reason. It's really inconvenient to have something that loud near you. You would never do it unless you really wanted to do it. You needed to do it. It's like, no, we've tried doing it quietly. It doesn't sound the same. It doesn't have the magic. That's why these guys turned everything up and recorded it when it mattered, when they were making their album, you know, translating their art for the audience. That's why they did it, right? And when you experience the sound and when you play it and you understand what you're able to express through that type of sound as a artist, as a musician, it's really exciting.
Yeah.
I think it's just for me, it's like a lost secret. That's something that we've forgotten that we should have cherished and nurtured and even, you know, further improved on. And yet, this sounds like a rant. It's not. But amplifier design has changed now. Most amplifiers are being made today to sound at their best without requiring to be fully cranked because it's supremely inconvenient. There are less recording studios to go and do that in.
Yeah.
You can't do it on stage because it's illegal to have things that loud within, you know, earshot of people who belong to unions and have health and safety requirements, and rightly so. We don't want deaf people because their amps are too loud. That would be horrific. That's not what I'm saying, but you know, there are ways to capture the sound now. This is kind of a new era that we're entering into where, although it might seem like amp profiling has been around for a long time, and certainly digital guitar products have been around for a long time, I believe what this represents is actually a paradigm shift where now we're able to access this kind of behavior, this full experience of a sound on the most rudimentary of tools. I mean, this runs on a free plugin.
Yeah.
The effects also can be loaded up in a free plugin. We haven't talked much about the studio effects, but you know, there's a lot of them. Every single sound has an effect preset on this pack, which was not always the case on the others because they weren't on the original sound, so they weren't needed. But this has got a lot of it, and those are really complex as well. Multiple compounded delays, like, you know, echoplex and old plate reverbs and the sound of the racquetball court. You know, I mean, it's funny to say it, but if you want it to be authentic, and I do absolutely want it to be authentic, you know, that's what we stand for as a company, is authenticity and maximum effort, right? There's no point in just making another Van Halen preset for the world. There are plenty of those already. There's no point in doing another Plexi amp profile and calling it Van Halen for the world. There's already plenty of those, and some of them are actually very, very good, but they aren't the sound on the record. So the purpose of this is we want to give you the sound on the record with exactly the same effects, with exactly the same behavior, so you can experience what he experienced when he was playing it. And hopefully that unlocks some insight for you as a player and gives you some kind of joy just to be able to maybe understand a bit more about why this phenomenal innovator was happy with one sound for like the majority of the heyday of his career. I know that he developed amps after that and that he diversified later. But when you consider the formative period of Van Halen, you can't deny that he just used the same thing for the whole time. And if you consider how creative he was, there has to be a reason for that. It must have fulfilled him in some way. And having played these now, I think I can understand why.
But it is, and I said to you, I think a couple of days ago, that instead of trying to seek complexity in the way that I was playing. I didn't need to because I had just this wonderful feeling that's going on the fret, even with the most simplest of things.
The sound has complexity.
Yeah.
You don't need to go looking.
It's all there.
It's right there.
So
One note.
So you have this, literally one note,
Yeah.
and using it in different ways.
Yeah.
And to me, that just means that you're getting into it. You're being creative straight away.
Yeah.
You're not fiddling with your buttons. And as per some of the examples, see how quickly you take that from an identical Van Halen sound on the record, slight adjustment, and we're in a different record. There's a theme forming here, guys, when it comes to like the production elements that are bringing through the consistency in what you're hearing.
Yeah, look, I mean, this is our video and our product, so I can wax lyrical about it all I want. I know I'm not the person maybe to tell you, but one thing I can say, and it's genuinely honest, guys, I learned all of these songs to do this for you. I didn't know how to play any of them. I'm a huge fan of Van Halen, don't get me wrong, but I just never stopped and learned the songs. I've never been that kind of a player who really wanted to learn other players note for note. I thought that it was Nuno Bettencourt from Extreme has a very similar view, and I've heard him say it before, and I identify with it. I want to be myself when I play, and I figured that if I spent too much time going too exact on learning other people's playing, that it would somehow erode that me part of is the player. And then it turns out that actually what I seem to have a great I seem to find easy is sounding like other people. And there's the irony at the end of it. But I did learn how to play these songs using these sounds. And I honestly can say that it made the process of learning what he was playing so much easier because it was doing the same thing.
So you're
like
not,
all the funny noises and everything that's going on when you start using the bar.
You can't get your head in the right. If you're not hearing what you want to hear, you can't.
But it's like half of the story. And I know everyone says, no, the sound isn't important. It's all in the hands. Like,
no.
Try one of these, honestly, and see if you still feel the same way. Honestly, that's ridiculous. Of course, it matters that you can play. I'm not saying it's not important. But the fact that you could think that it would be everything that matters, it just means if you believe that you've never played through a really, really loud, unleashed amp like that has given you, for me as well, I mean, remembering playing for real back in the day, those kind of things, it makes an impression on you. And maybe, for the younger generation who've never been able to experience that because the environment is not conducive. It's really difficult to do now. Of course, nobody's going to miss what they've never experienced. So I really hope that now that we've been able to recreate this behavior and this sound and we're able to put it in a format that people can use conveniently, actually it could perhaps, maybe I'm dreaming, but inject a little bit of that heritage back into the guitar sounds that we're hearing people use, because now they can easily get that same sound and behavior that's on something iconic. That to even think in the process of recording an album, particularly today, because most artists have to record themselves these days. They don't have
it's hard
a budget to go and get an old plexi and do all of this. I mean, maybe there's only one guitar solo on their entire album. Like Michael Jackson, right? No, I'm just saying, having this kind of stuff, bringing it into the modern world in a convenient form, it allows for the possibility that some people may rediscover, who remember how it was to record and play with these kind of sounds, but maybe some younger players who've never been able to experience that can discover it and understand why it's so important to those of us who do remember. And perhaps in some way we can bring back that kind of lost magic.
Bringing it back.
That's really sentimental and very cringy. I feel very strongly about it. For me as a player, like I said, there's nothing like it. The way that you can express what you want to with the instrument through something like that is unparalleled, and it is the reason why artists were able to play with one sound for decades. They were satisfied because it was just able to do what they needed.
So no requirement for 10,000 impulse responses?
Well, impulse responses can't do that, all right? So they're not applicable. But, I mean, watch the space. We are tackling that problem. I want speakers sounding like speakers again in the digital world.
It's
And we
gonna
have
happen.
something new coming that is going to do that job. And we'll have a long video probably on that as well, explaining all the science for those of you
That's going to be
interested.
fun. We're gonna there's gonna some scientists are coming in for that,
Ah, yes.
and there's going to be flip charts.
Science.
There's going to be formulas. There's going to be the periodic table.
Well, look, we're going to put the information in
Yeah.
one place for people to understand. Hopefully, this demonstration alone is enough to pique your interest. I'm pretty sure that you won't have heard an impulse response behave like that before. And the reason I'm pretty sure about that is they're not capable of it. It's scientifically not possible. So
Yeah.
it's not, that wasn't really an opinion, it's actual fact.
Yeah.
So, what about doing something that can? And let's see where that leads us. We've got plenty to deal with already with all these different artists that we want to do packs for. And again, as we've said on other videos, please get involved. Tell us what you think
Yeah.
of what you've heard today, and tell us also what you would really think would be a great thing for us to tackle. The harder, the better, right? We've just dropped Van Halen.
Yeah.
This is a statement of we will take it on. We don't care how hard people think it's going to be. We are ready. We've got the tools. We've got the willingness to go deep dive and find out everything and get this stuff done as close as we possibly can, if nothing else, for the historical preservation.
Yeah.
I mean, don't forget, soon some of this equipment is going to be museum grade, right? It's
Yeah.
we're already talking 50 years old in some cases.
Yeah.
Pretty soon, none of it's going to work. Then how are we going to get these sounds, right? It's time to get this done and give everybody access to that magic. So hopefully you've got some opinions, strong or otherwise, doesn't matter. We want to hear everything that you've got to say about what we're doing. This is kind of almost like a community effort at this point, where we want everybody's feelings and opinions on this subject to be part of what we're thinking about when we decide what to do next, and what we decide to tackle that is going to prove that we are up to the challenge.
Yeah. So, John Mayer, Metallica,
Yeah, now
the
Van
one
Halen.
and only Van Halen.
Yes, I'm very pleased about it too.
So, yeah, just come and check it out. Make sure you go and see those other videos.
Yes, particularly the section that explains about, what the producer series is, because I think it's kind of, again, really difficult for us to separate this from a normal amp profile without explaining those things. And although it is a lot of time that you have to sit and watch, hopefully it's also quite interesting. And maybe it's something that you would not be aware of, was not a part of amp profiles. And it certainly is the reason why when you listen to a record and you hear a guitar sound and you're like, wow,
Yeah.
that's amazing. And then you get a profile of the same amp. Maybe you don't get that same wow. That's all explained in that intro on the other video. So we'll pop it in the link description for you to have a look at. And then, comments, please. Comments, questions, anything you want to know. I'm not going to be telling you exactly how we recreated the sounds, because that's Eddie's secret and it's not for me to do. But obviously any questions about product and what we might be looking at doing next, and anything else you want to know, please ask and I'll be happy to answer.
Finally, prizes for the best knock.
Yeah.
Now beat it. I'm Jack.
I'm Stuart.
It's
Till next
Neutron.
time. See ya.